Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I'm assuming this is working.
Yes.
Awesome. That is great. So, hello and welcome to York Festival of Ideas. Thank you for taking the time out today. I was going to say it was sunny, but unfortunately it's not. It was when I left Nares earlier today. My name's Kevin Smalley. I have the fairly easy job of being chair today, supporting David. And it's my great pleasure welcoming you. Today's event is sponsored by the Institute of Engineering and Technology, the IET, which I'm pleased to be a member of. The IET is the largest multidisciplinary professional engineering institution in the world, with offices all over the place. And the North Yorkshire network of the IET is the proud sponsor of this event and collaborator with York Festival of Ideas. So, on to the main event and introducing David. So, David Trousdale is our speaker today. David is a net zero and decarbonisation specialist. He has experience developing zero emissions mobility strategies, shaping and procuring mobility solutions, built environment and net zero solutions, and translating these into action plans. Okay, and that's quite important in that translation. In the next 35-40 minutes, David's going to share his insights into the targets for EV charge point deployment, EV infrastructure within the local context, and the opportunities that lie ahead. I'm sure David's presentation is going to promote lots of questions, and we've left 20 minutes at the end to answer those, and I'll jump up and field those as we go on. Before we start, a bit of audience participation, and don't look scared, it's quite a simple set of questions. So, I just want to test the room. Who currently has an EV? Okay, interesting. Who has made a decision for the next vehicle to have an EV? Okay. Who is still undecided as to whether an EV is right for them? Okay, cool, that's good. Right, and the last one, David just dropped this one on me. Who sees EVs as part of a wider solution, part of a wider transport solution?
Solution to what?
Getting about, movement.
What we're walking or a push bike?
All of that is multimodal. Yeah, absolutely. So, great. So, gives a bit of a sense check for the room. I'm going to now leave it to you, David. So,
can everyone hear me okay as well?
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. I'm going to move over here just because my clicker is here. So, right. Firstly, welcome everyone today. Great to have you here. You'll be thinking, okay, EVs. Why is that important? Well, today I'm going to talk a little bit about EVs within the context of the city, EVs in terms of moving forward, in terms of getting people around, and give you a bit more of like a technical, on the ground detail of how do you go about putting in place the infrastructure, how do you go about moving things around the cities in terms of using EV vehicles and all of that jazz. But I want to start off firstly by giving you a bit of info about myself, why I've gotten into this space, why it's of interest to me, and ultimately why it's of importance. So, for me, EV is primarily about how do we move forward into delivering transport networks. This is my little lad Ethan. I've got two little boys. Ethan here is, but basically went and got the car keys. Should I be leaving the car keys on the side so the kid can get them? Well, that's another story. But anyway, he got the car keys, went into the boot of the car, and then took out the EV charging cable and then tried to plug it into his little Types car, which makes me laugh. And I love this photo because it actually brings EV to life on the ground. What it demonstrates is this is the future generation. These are the people who are going to be driving EVs in the future, whether that is via autonomy, whether that is via a driving licence, what have you. I'm moving in the middle because I think I might be in the way for some people, but whether that is about people doing different forms of transport, doing cycling and then having an EV as another solution, it's all of those things, but the future generation are pretty much focused on EV and it's part of their future plans for transport, really. But a little bit about me, so I live in the city, I live in Huntington, I cycled here, so I do have an EV, but I cycled here. That was one of the reasons I wanted to ask about that multiple options of transport. I always think if you have to use a car, you have to use a car, but you should always challenge yourself as to whether you need to use a car and there's other options available. It doesn't work for everyone. I'm a realist at the end of the day, but if you can get somewhere with your kids in a bike trailer, as long as it's safe, you can get somewhere with an EV, providing you have no other option. If you can get there with public transport, you should always consider that. Father of 2 kiddies, as you can see, he's one of them. There, Isaac's my other little lad. He hasn't quite worked out how to plug the car in yet, so I haven't quite taught him that yet, but I'm sure he'll learn from his brother. I'm all in terms of EV and green. So we've got solar on the roof, battery storage in the house, so I've got a real world experience of how it works. Basically I'm a Yorkshireman, so if I can get free energy from the roof when I plug my car in, why wouldn't you? Free energy, driving around with free energy is amazing. So I have 2 EVs. Speaking to Kevin earlier on, should I be a two-car household? Again, you can chastise me on that front. Really we should be going down to 1, but again, I come back to that point about being practical, about making the choices. Sometimes it's hard if you've got little kiddies and you're both doing different jobs. So we want to move down to a 1 EV household, and possibly in the future leasing an EV or sharing an EV in the community, but we currently have 2. I've travelled 200 miles on an EV and more than that. Real world examples of how you can use it in long distance travel, whether it's Edinburgh, going down to London, going to Oxford, going to Bristol. Never had a problem. Genuinely never had a problem. That's not me being an evangelicist about it. Practically, pulled up to the charging point, plugged in, tapped, paid for the energy, gone, no problem. Had lunch at the same time, had a coffee, rested, all those things. So for me, I'm about the practical aspect of EV. I'm not going to tell you, we should all be EV all the time, it's a journey. But for me, I've never had a problem with it. And if anyone comes to me and says, they're never going to work, I'll be like, well, let's look at the real world example of when are you going to be driving more than 50 miles in a day? When are you going to be driving journeys where they won't be charging around? I'll always challenge people on that, because it's about being practical and realising that a lot of the stuff there that people use as excuses not to use EV is already there. And as I said, I've never had an EV charging story. Just to note, these are all my personal views. I've just recently started working for Newcastle City Council as their net zero climate advisor, so I'm advising them on the various aspects here, but these are all my personal views, so just to note that. So, I'm going to have to go backwards and forwards here like that. I'm going to start off with some myth busting, just because it's really important. First example there, that picture there is Luton Airport Terminal 2 car park. What was really interesting about that story is as soon as that went up last year, I think it was August time, everyone on X, formerly Twitter, were already on there going, it's an EV's set it alight, it must be an EV, it was that caused it. Turns out it was a petrol or diesel Land Rover. I won't throw shade on Land Rover, but I'm just demonstrating that ultimately in that instance, there's a lot of people here who've already got views, who want to make those views heard. It might not necessarily be the right views. And those views can be coming from multiple angles. That could be coming from a petrochemical industry who are trying to push people away from changing to EV, because do you know what? If people use less oil, then the profit's going to be less. It might also be lobbyists from people who don't want to change. There's all sorts of things out there. So when there's these myths, when there's an argument that's set about EV, when someone says something to you, there's not enough infrastructure, or if you're a sceptic, just sometimes think, and it works both sides, if you're an absolute evangelicist, sometimes think, who's pushing the argument, why are they pushing the argument, and what's the logic behind it? In this instance, where these myths are coming from, who's pushing the argument against change, why are they pushing it, and what's the logic? It's really important, because I'll just run through some of these myths in a minute and just unpick them a little bit, just so it helps maybe around the dinner table. EV conversations around the dinner table, you might want to change your dinner party maybe, but it might be having a conversation with friends about it over a cup of tea. I don't know about EVs. The information here just gives you a bit of a flavour of those conversations, helps you unpick some of those myths. The first one really, are they environmentally damaging? Yes and no, depending on what angle. The key argument that most people make around EVs is that they're using rare earth minerals, building batteries. Batteries are then going to be wasting energy, and then what do you do with the batteries afterwards? For me, the argument is pretty clear. If you own an EV, if it's new for 3 to 4 years, and then keep owning it after that point, you've pretty much, there's no environmental impact. It's actually not taking carbon out of the environment, but compared to a petrol or diesel vehicle, it will reduce the amount of carbon that's released into the environment. Why is that? Most of the energy that is used to create an EV is putting it into the batteries. There is that's a bit of a, I'm trying to work out, is it because I'm near that? Who knows? I might just stand here. Most of the challenges with EVs is around the production of the batteries. rare earth minerals. Mining is a challenge, we can't change that, but we're becoming more environmentally conscious around where we get our materials from and how they're mined. So that's changing, and a lot of EVs now have like a disclaimer on them, or batteries have a disclaimer saying we've sourced the materials fair. So first argument there is people go, oh, batteries are really bad environment. Some are, the earlier ones probably were, the modern ones are getting better, and they're much better at being recycled now. They're also better batteries from a point of view of a materials recyclability perspective. You think with a nice internal combustion engine vehicle, when I was younger I used to go to Piggott's Auto Parts on the outskirts of town. I think it's gone now, but and we used to go there and get the little parts from our car and put it on the Fiat 500. It was awful, it's a horrible car, but anyway. But the parts in an engine, if you think of how complicated an engine is, all of those parts, recycling every single bit of that is much more difficult than a battery. From a battery, all you've got is the actual battery and the small motor that sits on top of it. Just from the simplicity of the pieces within it, much easier to recycle. So, in that sense, EVs are better for the environment in the sense that if you've owned them for longer periods of time, chances are, if you've charged them via responsible energy providers and what have you, they'll produce less carbon in the long run. But from the environmental perspective, and this is me being a pragmatist, they still produce tyre wear and tear, and they also produce brake wear and tear, which creates small particulates that get into your lungs and can have impacts on asthma and contribute to that. So that's me being pragmatic. Every car does that, heavy SUVs do that, every form of car does it. So EVs are good in terms of they reduce your carbon emissions and you actually take carbon out of the environment going forward post year 4 of owning a car, or if it's a second-hand car, but they still have an impact from a particulate matter perspective. We should all wait for hydrogen cars, that's the second myth. No. Hydrogen is not ready, will not be ready for passenger cars for the next 20, 30, 40 years, possibly never. And the logic behind this, and it's one that people forget about when we talk about hydrogen. Let's say for every watt of energy, or every kilowatt of energy you put into a car, whether it's a petrol or diesel car, or a hydrogen car, or an electric car, for every single watt of that, an EV is 60 to 77% efficient. What do I mean by that? So pretty much every bit of energy, you're getting 77% of that energy back to move, to keep you warm, to run the infotainment system. Hydrogen, you only get 33% of that back. Petrol or diesel, you only get, and if it's run on e-fuels, you only get 13 to 20% back. So on the basic level of efficiency, hydrogen's not the future. You're literally taking water, turning it into hydrogen, which is very, very energy intensive, and then effectively putting it into your car. We then need the network of fueling networks to put it in place. Not going to happen, just too expensive, especially when we're installing all the EV infrastructure. Maybe for trains, lorries, very heavy goods vehicles, yes, but for cars, no. So if anyone says to you, I'm waiting for the next hydrogen car, you just tell them they're probably not going to be alive when that car comes into, but that's a bit blunt, maybe not, don't leave with that. Just suggest to them there's other options available. They're more expensive than petrol and diesel cars. New, yes, can't get away from that fact. In the long run, ownership-wise, provided you can charge quite a lot at home, you can charge a little bit out and about using public chargers. Over about 3 to 4 years, they're actually cheaper post that point, and if you hold them for a longer period of time, you'll be able to save tons of money versus a petrol diesel vehicle.
Isn't that the elephant in the room, though?
Exactly, and I think the challenge is, there's a couple of arguments here. The first one is how people feel about buying second-hand vehicles and second-hand EVs. There's a whole argument and discussion around that, which I could spend a whole day on. The second argument is, where are all of our low-cost EVs coming from? Most of them are coming from China. There's a whole political argument there that I'm not going to get sucked into, but it's one of the areas that needs to change, and I think it will change going forward in the next couple of years. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to pick through some of these myths. Yes, they are more expensive at the very front end. Some can be £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 more expensive, and the challenge is, in this current climate, some people do not have that. And that's a political argument that we need to work out. How do we square that circle? How do we make them more affordable? But if someone is able to afford one, in the long run, they are more affordable. They are more cost effective than a petrol or diesel vehicle, and you're not exposed to the vagaries of the fuel price. You are exposed to the energy price, but that's settled to a degree, and I think it will keep settling. I'll rattle through this because I want to get into some of the more really interesting stuff. Well, this is really important. Too heavy for car parks? No. It's one of the arguments that keeps coming up, and it's usually from the car park companies who haven't invested in their older car parks from the 60s and 70s. Basically, an SUV, very heavy SUV that started to rise on the roads, sort of mid-90s onwards, they're having as much strain on car parks as EVs. So if someone says to you, oh, they are going to be too heavy for car parks, and they are from a car parking company, you'd be like, well, why don't you invest in preparation for SUVs? So don't use it as just an excuse not to invest or an excuse to charge more for EVs because you should have done that for SUVs. Setting everything alight. No, as I just said at the start, they're not. I think it's something stupid. I think there's loads of research being done. They are, if you look at 100 vehicles, like 10 vehicles in the 100 could go up in flames when they're an ICE vehicle, and I think it's something should be like 0.0.1 of those vehicles might be an EV. So that's not the case. And the final part, and this is that bit about the mobility piece I picked up at the start, there are certain arguments that say, oh, EVs are all an attempt to prevent us from moving around. It's all part of the 15-minute community. It's all part of the plan so that we can't move places because ultimately the range is restricting us, and there's a little bit of technology that tells me I can only drive this far. No, that's there's certain arguments and views for why that's being pushed, but that's not the case. So EVs as a whole, there are some myths about it, but always challenge those myths and make sure that they're based on fact. Some of the bits are factual, but not all of them are. So, bringing it to a local context, really, EVs are growing. They're continuing to grow, specifically within the city. And it's a really important point to note because, again, you'll hear quite a lot of the arguments saying that there's a blip in EV adoption. To a degree, it's plateaued a little bit, but if you look at some of the numbers here, I won't read through them infinitum, but ultimately, 25% of vehicles will be EV by 2030, 71% by 2040, and 87% by 2050. And that there could be a slightly higher than that, slightly lower than that, but this change is happening, and this is within this city. There's loads of EVs on the road, we've all seen them. Lots of those EVs aren't struggling to charge currently, but if we start seeing these number of EVs on our roads, we need to start planning for that. We need to start getting the infrastructure in place, and the power, and all the other stuff that sits behind it. We need to solve the challenge of how do people charge on terrace streets, and I'll pick that one up in a minute. All sorts of things, but ultimately the demand is changing. It's really important. It's the one bit that we have to take into consideration, and ultimately it's happening. So, UK-wide, we need to install 300,000 charge points by 2030. We're about 61,000 now, and that is continuing to ramp up. I think we'll roughly make that target. York as a city has about 1,300 charge points, and it is projected to have about 2,200 charge points by 2040. There's about 147 in the city. Most of those tend to be spread, and I've got a map later on. This is the, I'm guessing most of people know the city. Yeah, that's the Monks Cross.
It's never used.
Yeah, and then there's an interesting point around that, which I don't know if I've got time to unpick, but these are the bays of charges at Monks Cross, and then over the road, literally almost if you were here, is the rapid chargers that are used frequently. I think there's 8 or 9 there that are used all the time. Quite a few of the chargers in the city are what we call slow to fast, which is 7 kilowatt. What does that mean in the real world? If you've got a standard car, 50 kilowatt battery, you're probably looking at about 7 to 8 hours to charge. Anything over 50 kilowatt is roughly an hour to charge. 50 kilowatt is basically 50 minutes for 50 kilowatt, roughly, but about an hour really when you swing slow down. A lot of the investment in the city, from the council's perspective, at the parking ride sites, and quite a lot of the charges in the city are run by private companies, so BB Pulse, Ionity, Instavolt, all of these names that over time they'll be as well known as Shell or BP or like Total as your garage. and they are giving most of the city the power it needs. And then there's a lot of charging at home. I don't know the number of, I could probably get the data, but I don't know the number of off-street charging solutions where people got their own drives, but I'm guessing with the number of EVs in the city, and bearing in mind there's about 88,000 vehicles in the city, and bearing in mind there's, I think, as I said, 2 to 4% of that are EVs. A lot of the charging, I'm guessing, is done at home, but some will be done at those points. Another point to note, and again, I'm not here to criticise the council, I'm just stating what policy it stands. There is no solution currently for cable charging on the street. What do I mean by that? Quite a lot of cities now have a solution where you either plug in your house and have a cable that runs on the street either through a gully, or a cable that you plug in and has like a little rumble strip that covers the cable so people don't trip. York has decided to ban all of those solutions. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, that's just how the city's decided to enact that policy. I'd suggest if I was an advisor that they might want to reconsider that, but ultimately that's what they're currently doing in the city, and it ultimately means they're going to need to work out a solution to enable people to charge in a residential setting with a terrace street. It's one of the biggest problems with EV, it's one of the biggest challenges with EV, not problem, of how do you get certain streets able to charge cars. If you don't do that, if you don't have that infrastructure in place, some people will not be able to charge and will find it difficult. So the next bit I want to talk about is, okay, so we know EVs are going up, we know the numbers are increasing, we know where the chargers are currently being put, and we know that there is a need for chargers going forward. The next bit I want to help everyone understand this room is, so how do you go about installing it? It's really important to understand this. Okay. It's really important to understand this because understanding this helps you if you want to sort of lobby your local councillor, if you want to ask the council to make a move, to understand how charging's done, how you go about getting it in place, because I like to think if you're more informed in it, then you can make better decisions yourself about where you charge, but also you can ask your leaders or your local councillors to install things in certain places. But it really requires an in-depth understanding of where people are charging and why, really. It's all about understanding where the present demand is and the future demand. And it's very much about really determining what the data is telling you. So how often are people driving down certain roads? How often people are doing certain things? Why are they charging in certain places? And ultimately it's not about using hunches. So, I think that could be a really good place to put a charge point. We've found that happen in the past, and when we've done that, those chargers are either not very well used, they either get ripped out of the ground, or they might get vandalised. Basically, if you use the data, if you use logic, if you use an approach where you understand where things are needed and why and when, it helps you better install them. And installing and maintaining charge points is an area that's really important, because ultimately, once people become reliant on the charger and expect it to be there, and it's not maintained, people then lose confidence either in the charge point or the network, and then that all has an effect on whether people want to adopt an EV or not. So it's about making sure that those things, once they're installed, are installed in the right place, they're installed in such a way that they're maintained properly, and they actually meet the needs of local people. If you do all of those things, in theory, people will make that transition to EV. So it's all about demand analysis. Demand is pretty much what is driving people wanting to use EVs, and simplistically, it's broken down into the why. So why do people want to charge? The who. So who is charging? Is it your bright young things who've just gone and got a new job and they've got a little mini EV, or is it your families with 2 kids who've got lots of needs in terms of getting kids from A to B? Is it people who are going to the gym and want to charge when they're at the gym? Is it people going to Tesco's and do the shop? Understanding who those people are helps you understand what type of charger they might need. Are they going to want to pay for a really fast charger, like a really, really fast charger? Because the faster the speed, the more expensive charging is. The where is really important. So where are people going to charge? Where are people going just generally? Are people using the A64 to get around the city? So actually, do we want to be throwing all of our money into locations around the A64 where charge points would be best placed? How many people are going to Sainsbury's, Tesco, should those supermarkets actually have huge banks of chargers? Would that solve the problem? Would that help? Possibly, depends on the information. And the when, so when do people charge? Are people charging from 5 to 7 at night when they've just got home from work? Are people charging in the middle of the day on a Sunday? And how does that compare with where the peaks and troughs of energy usage are across everything else? You know, if during the Euros, and who knows if England get very far, we won't take bets on that one, but let's say we get to the semi-final and everyone does that run for a coffee or a tea at half-time. If there's EVs plugged in at the same time, how are we going to manage that? It's one of the challenges. But the when of people charging, when they charge, where they charge, and all of those things, and the what. So what type of charges do people want to use? What type do people like? What type do people not like? All of these points are really important. And we've never had to think about these when we've come to petrol stations, because from a petrol station perspective, we built it and you'll come here. Whereas for EVs, it's about, we need to consider why you're coming here, when you're coming here, and what you're going to do when you're here, because all of those things are really important to help get the right infrastructure, get the right power to those locations, and actually help people build EV into their day-to-day life without actually inconveniencing them. If you're in the gym for an hour a day, if you're at yoga, if you're doing your shopping and you want to plug in for an hour, or you can plug in for an hour, that's an hour of power that you could get without actually inconveniencing yourself just by plugging in, providing it's easy to do that, because that's another challenge. And this is about understanding the different use cases. So a use case is primarily how people use charging. And there's really two types primarily. There's en route, which is pretty much I'm going to drive 200, 300 miles and I want to charge part of the way because I will not have enough battery to get to my destination. And then there's destination charging, which is there's three types of that. Around your home, so can you charge at your home? Second one is when you're out and about, commercial charging, which is like, you know, when you're at the gym, when you're at the supermarket. And the third one is can you charge in your workplace? All of these things, again, you didn't have to think about with petrol vehicles. You just went to a petrol station. But there's real opportunities to charge in environments where you're doing stuff already, and actually not having to go specifically somewhere to charge is really important. And ultimately, you know, I'm not pushing Tesco's, I'm not pushing Ionity, but they're just two examples of the one at the bottom is destination. So as I said, come to your Tesco's, plug in. Pod Point are quite good actually, I've used them quite a lot. There are others who are just as good. And Ionity, mixed bag experience of using them. Usually you need an app. Some of their stations you can't just tap and pay. But that's a whole bit about user experience that I'm not going to unpick at this moment in time because it could take forever. So coming back to the local context. So the picture on the left is from a really good website. If you use an EV and you haven't used that map before, use that map. Really, really, really good. A really, really, really good website. Because basically it's like it amalgamates all the information of all the charge point operators across the whole of the UK, and you'll see each of the little ticks or crosses by the side of the charger. So the pink ones are rapid, so you'll see, I'll come over here while I'm nearby it. So the pink ones basically show you where really, really fast charging. So here you've got, this is Multicross Park and Ride, this is Poppleton. So they're the two, that one there and that one there are the two council ones that have been installed recently. A lot of the yellow ones are slowest speeding, and the ones with little homes on are where people are allowed to charge at home actually. Actually, this is around here, so that's my house, and I actually allow people to charge at my house. This is for a fee. Go on.
Is the website national, or is it just for...
National. Really, really good. Really good.
Map.
Zap map.
Zap map.
Really, really good. And I've used it on long distance travel. So, like when I go down to Oxford, when I drive to Newcastle, when I drive to London, you basically just use this and it allows you to see where the charges are live. It's really good if you've got a passenger, because I always, when I plan a long journey, work out a charge point I'm going to stop. And I often stop at charge points off the motorway because I don't like to have to spend 15, 20, 30 pounds on a sandwich at a service station. There we go, that's spot on.
It's international.
Oh, it's international now as well, yeah.
France.
Right.
Yeah, well, it didn't.
charge at your house, is it free? Can you give us an address?
If the sun's out, I might let you have it for free. I might give you an hour for free, but you'll have to buy me a coffee. yeah, the Zap map was UK based, but it's now gone international, which thank you for picking that up. I didn't know that actually. But basically, it's really, really good. She's on a Pixel as well, good phone. It's a really good website for planning charging. Well, as I say, what I do is I use that. I tend to work out a really good charge point to go to on my journey, and then have backups, because sometimes there are times where I've got to a charge point and they're too busy. Again, that's another horror story. That isn't always the case, but I've had that once. So you always have a backup. But I never charge at the service stations on the motorway, because it's the exact same argument for filling up your car on the motorway. Really expensive. Food's really expensive. So why would you? I've seen a lot nicer, as much as you can say I've seen a lot nicer lay-bys, but I've seen some nicer locations where I've gone off the beaten track. But really what this is doing, the ZapMap website just gives you a flavour of where charging is in York currently. But what I'm really pointing out here is we should be looking at using shopping centres, retail parks to meet a lot of our charging needs. We're there already. We're doing things there already. We should be using hotel car parks for people who are visiting the city. We should be using workplace car parks for a lot of times where people are charging and going to work. The residential bit in the city is going to be really hard. It's going to be hard in most cities, and there's a lot of funding there from the government, and I'm guessing it's going to continue. The elephant in the room is also the election, but I signed up to this before the election, so I'll probably have a discussion about that in the questions and answer session. But en route charging, where you're going long distance, in our city's context, A19, A64, where we've already got service stations, we should consider high powered charging for people on nearby those service stations, for people who might be going to Scarborough, who've come up from, come across from Sheffield or come across from Leeds, who are doing a slightly longer journey, giving those people options to charge fast nearby the main routes that they're passing, and actually there's an opportunity for the council to make a bit of money in these contexts if they get it right. So yeah, just gives you what charging means in a local context. Got a couple more slides and we are on time just about, So this sounds a bit like consultancy, but data-driven mapping is key. And what do I mean by that? If you've got Google Maps, if you've got any other sort of mapping tool, using as much information as possible, where people are going, there's loads of data, loads of information on that. Using what already exists from the ZapMap or other information networks, putting that all on a map, and then effectively working out where demand is based on that. It's not too difficult. I'm guessing York will have done it. Most local authorities are doing it. It then helps you work out this map, for example, on the right hand side there. Those hexagons give you an idea of where the highest demand is. So anything that's redder is higher demand. Now the hard bit here is working out, using that map, based on those red hexagons, where in that specific location is best placed to put a charger, because just because it says it has high demand doesn't mean that it might be suitable from a land use perspective. But it's a really good place to start. You can put all sorts of other info on here, like where lamp columns are, so you can plug into a lamp column if it's set up right. Where the local power grid is already strained, where it's constrained, and where there's loads of free capacity. All of this information exists, and a lot of our power companies are starting to share stuff like that as we go and as we move into it. But bringing it back to the local level, once you've maybe determined a high level location, the next bit really is the practical aspects. How do you actually install it on the ground? What do you need to do? What do you need to consider? I'm not suggesting all of us will go and get our hard hats now and set up your own little highways consultancy or your highways company to do it. You could do if you have the right connections, but it's very much around looking at these 8 or 9 bullet points. So where's the nearest electrical box? What do I mean by that? Those little boxes on the street that you see where basically house all of our local power, and that's what feed all the houses. How constrained is that currently, and can we run power to those points quite easily? Is the grid able to handle that power need in the local area? As I've noted, a lot of the challenges currently is grid capacity, and that is an area that's been invested in heavily over the next coming years. But is that...
No. Well, DNO's really not investing. That is a big problem in rural areas.
Yes, it is, you're right. National Grid in some cases is investing.
The upper levels, yeah.
Yeah, the upper level, but the
you've
DNO,
You've got to get it around the country. You can't just have a backbone.
Yeah, you're right, and that's one of the challenges. And I would hazard, and again, I don't want to get too political here, but I could hazard that having potentially a nationalised power network where DNOs are removed and you have
If only.
if only, but it could help make that process work. But you're right, and you make a really good point there. That there's a whole distinction between you've got your central power body, National Grid, and then you've got your DNOs who are basically who you pay your power bill to, basically.
And all are owned overseas.
All owned overseas, a little bit like Thames Water, for example, or partly owned. But yes, there's I think it's British Gas is Iberdrola, isn't it, which is Spanish. But anyway, there's a whole other piece there to unpick that I would have the whole day to do. But DNOs, some are investing in it, but you make a good point that not everyone is investing in the same way. And Northern Power Grid, I know, have a mixed level of investment in that space. Width of pavement's really important. So actually, if you've got a charge point already, are you going to put a charge point? If there isn't 2 metres around that charge point in the pavement space, you're actually breaching a rule around giving people accessibility. Things like that aren't thought about. Signage, so where is the charge point? What's it saying about it? Number of EV parking bays required. So are you going to enforce them? Are you going to make it that you're going to find people? And all of those things are really challenging when I come back to that residential setting, because as soon as if I went to you and said, you've got a street with 100 residential car parking spaces on it, and I'm going to take 10, 15, 20 of those away for EV charge points, I can guarantee you there's going to be a bit of a argy-bargy and an argument. So there's a whole point here about how do you engage with communities as well. And this comes back to my pragmatic point. And ultimately, it's also what type of charge point and how you're going to position it. So I said earlier on about lamp columns. There's quite a lot of cities who've now got lamp columns that you can plug into. But if that lamp column is at the back of the pavement, you can't have a cable trailing over the pavement to your car. So that solution in that instance wouldn't work. And again, I'll show you in an example in a minute, what does that mean in the real world, and just bringing it to life. And I'm almost finished, Kevin, because I'm just aware of time and we'll go into questions. So I've just picked the street. I might have accidentally picked the street someone lives on. So this is very close to the hospital. I think this is, I never remember, it's that Haxby Road, the one that's by the hospital, or Wigginton Road, never know which name it is.
It's Viner.
Yeah, so this is Viner, but this one here, if people know, is the road that goes out, Nestle sort of up here, and this is the road that sort of connects, not too far from where I live, but classic terrace street in York, relatively, you know, quite a busy little street. It's not a cut through because it's got bollards at the end, but just bringing to life an example of how you put about a charge point in the street. Problem is, it would be really hard in this instance, bringing it to life. One, pavement's not wide enough. So if you put a charge point there and someone was in a wheelchair, they'd have to leave the path. Shouldn't be doing that. Point two, you mentioned that, I mentioned about the lamp column piece. You couldn't use a lamp column to charge on this street because you'd be trailing the cable over the street. Three, street's fairly busy, so you'd have challenges around enforcing charge point installation there. And four, there isn't enough, the street isn't necessarily wide enough for the size of the bay as well for a charge point. So in this instance, and if I was going to look at charge points in this case, that 5 is actually at the end of Viner Street, just through one of the bollards, and it's quite a large space which is unmarked. In this instance of a residential setting, I would be hazarded to put several charge points at the end of that street where it's not going to annoy local residents, and actually local residents can use those without it being too difficult. It doesn't happen all the time, but that's just a really good example of how a real world location could be enabled in a residential setting to enable charging.
Why not just put a load of grooves across the pavement with the bespoke channels with a flip-up lid and let everybody charge themselves?
That's the bit I said about council policy. Now, Durham are doing that, Newcastle, North Tyneside, quite a few cities are doing it. Again,
It's more democratic.
Yeah, and it is also, if you've got a plug near the front of your house, it's actually also cheaper for a resident because they can actually take advantage of their cheaper energy price at home. Again, I'm not challenging the council, I don't want to be seen as, but it would be, if I was to look at that as a potential solution, I would suggest it's a way of unlocking the challenge of a residential setting in some residential locations. So, just to bring some of this to life in terms of, I've spoken about the opportunities and now just some of the challenges, and I think picking up your point earlier on, the elephant in the room, how do the car companies produce an affordable EV? It's one that's really important and we need to work it out, and it's one that really needs to be cracked, and I think it will happen, but will it happen quick enough? That's the big question. How do you install enough charge points just ahead of demand so you don't have loads just sitting there, just dormant? How do you know the demand will change as charge points change, as the batteries change? Once they get bigger, once they start having more density, is the charge points going to be enough? Or actually do we have too many because people will charge less but for longer? How will the grid manage it? We'll just pick that one point up earlier. And ultimately, how will they also stay resilient in an uncertain future? Now, I don't want to be a naysayer, but we all know that we're entering into a period of geopolitical instability. So how do you ensure a power network is resilient enough to survive cyber attacks, or worse still, critical attacks? We've seen in the Ukraine how a challenging nation, an aggressive nation, can disrupt power networks. And if your entire transport network is reliant on energy and EVs, I'd be naive to say to you that we need to really consider how do we balance those needs and make sure that we've got a resilient transport network. So just in summary, and then we'll go into questions, and Kevin will lead the question session. Don't buy into the myths. Some of the points are true, some of the points are driven by certain biases, some of the points are just downright wrong. So always ask someone, and even if someone's saying to you, buy an EV or buy a Tesla. I'm not a Tesla fanboy, I do have one, but there are other options there that are just as good, if not better. But always challenge when someone's saying to you about EVs, that's what, I've got nowhere to charge. Do you, or are you just arguing a certain case? Demand is growing, the number of charge points being installed is growing. We know that, and it's going to keep growing. Data is key to it, and ultimately, not every street is suitable for a charge point. Some won't be suitable. We need to find a way of enabling those streets and those people who live there to charge. And our power network needs to prepare for the future ahead. The change is happening. We need to make sure that it is resilient, can handle all sorts of things, whether it is more violent weather, which is then going to make our wind farms struggle more because they're built with certain power capacities in mind, all sorts of things. So that's just a real summary, and hopefully you found that really interesting. Personal email there if you want to drop me a message, and we're going to go into the Q&A session now. But thank you so much for your time, everyone, and hopefully that's helpful.